Priya hurried along the narrow street. The air was thick and humid. The smell of rain lingered. Shadows from the flickering streetlights danced around her. Priya clutched her shawl tighter. She wished she hadn't stayed so late at her friend's house. A low growl of thunder rumbled in the distance. She quickened her pace, her heart pounding in her chest. Priya was almost at the crossroads when she heard footsteps behind her, heavy footsteps. She glanced over her shoulder. 5 men, their faces hidden behind scarves, were approaching. Fear, sharp and cold, shot through her. She tried to scream, but no sound came out. Priya ran, her breath catching in her throat, but the men were faster. They grabbed her, their grip like iron. She struggled, kicking and screaming, but it was no use. They dragged her into the darkness, the sound of her own terror echoing in her ears. The men took her to an abandoned building. It was dark and smelled of decay. They tied her hands and feet, their touch rough and cruel. Priya's mind raced. Who were these men? Why were they doing this to her? One by one, they hurt her. Priya closed her eyes, trying to disappear into herself. The pain was unbearable. Time lost all meaning. Hours bled into each other, filled with pain and terror. The faces of the men blurred into a terrifying mask of malice. Priya drifted in and out of consciousness. She was vaguely aware of the men talking amongst themselves. They were arguing about something, about her. Then silence. She was alone. When Priya opened her eyes, the first light of dawn was filtering through the cracks in the walls. Her body ached, every muscle screaming in pain. She was cold, shivering uncontrollably. The events of the night came back to her in fragments, each one more horrifying than the last. She lay there for what seemed like an eternity, too weak to move. Then she heard the sound of footsteps. Someone was coming. Priya closed her eyes, fear gripping her heart once more. Had the men returned? Help me, she whispered, her voice hoarse and raspy. The footsteps stopped beside her. A calloused hand touched her arm. Priya flinched, expecting the worst, but the voice that spoke was kind, filled with concern. "Don't worry, child, you're safe now." It was an old farmer, his face etched with worry. He had found her while he was tending to his fields. He helped her up and took her back to his village. Priya spent weeks in the hospital, her body slowly healing, but the scars ran deep, etched into her soul. The nightmares started almost immediately. She would wake up screaming, the faces of her attackers leering at her from the shadows. Priya couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. She saw them everywhere, in the shadows, in the faces of strangers, in her dreams. They were always there, their eyes following her every move. She told the police about the men, about their faces hidden behind scarves, but they hadn't been caught. The investigation was slow, the authorities seemingly indifferent to her plight. Priya felt alone, lost in a sea of fear and uncertainty. Arjun, Priya's husband, was a quiet man. He worked as a school teacher in their village. When he saw what they had done to his Priya, he was overcome with rage. He swore he would find the men who did this and make them pay. Arjun started his own investigation. He spoke to people, gathered information, followed every lead. He discovered that the men who attacked Priya were part of a gang known for their brutality. They had been arrested a few weeks after the attack on Priya, caught for another crime. But then something strange happened. One by one, the men started dying. Freak accidents, the police called it. One was hit by a bus, another electrocuted, a third found drowned in a shallow river. The news sent chills down Priya's spine. Was it a coincidence, or was something more sinister at play?